Welcome to the last event in this first season of the reading series at the Hudson Opera House. Thank you, Opera House, for letting this be here. Thank you, Tammy, Sage, Louise, for all the work you guys do to make it happen. I couldn't have been happier about the people that have read in this so far, nor the audiences that have attended it. It's been palpable, the listening in this room, and that's not just my opinion. It's been said. So tonight I'm introducing Robert Kelly and Charlotte Mandell. And my first knowledge of them, not knowing who they were, I acquired 2 books in high school. One of them was Robert's Lapis, the other one Charlotte's translation of Proust's
The
Wine Affair. And what I remember of Charlotte's translation is it was the first time I realized I was dealing with a translation, not because I thought this isn't right, but I knew that Proust didn't write in English, so I was amazed that the language I was experiencing, this sort of profound experience I had with the material of this language, could possibly be a translation. Because before then I thought a translation just meant something that's equally bad English. So, and I still sort of carry that feeling about when I read Charlotte's translations. There's there's an art to it, and so I don't really have to say that much more about it because I feel profoundly about it. Robert's Lapis, I didn't understand a word of, really. And it's strange that I read the entire book. It's amazing that something can be accessible to someone who doesn't understand any of what's in it. I've read since then, it's replete with things I now understand and a lot that I still don't. But you can imagine that I was surprised to discover that these 2 people who lived on my bookshelf actually lived together in real life. And I was again surprised to learn that they've never given a public reading together as a duo. So I'm honored to present them tonight. And Charlotte will be reading first, and then we'll have an intermission where I move that to here, and then Robert will read. So, Charlotte Mandell.
Okay, so I'm going to be reading a little selection of things just because, just to give you an idea of the different kind of work that I do. It'll all be sort of different. And I'm going to start out with the first book that I translated when I graduated from Bard. It's called the Tombeau of Ibn Arabi. It's by Abdelwahab Meddeb. And it was, published in 1995 in England by a magazine called Tamas, which doesn't exist anymore. So this is a republication of that magazine. This was published by Fordham University Press recently, but I translated it when I was 24 or something. And this was my first published translation when I got out of college. And Abdelwahab Meddeb was a friend of Pierre Joris, who is a friend of Tamas also, and Robert. And so he introduced me to his work, and I kind of fell in love with this book. It's inspired by the great Sufi poet Ibn Arabi, and also by Dante's La Vita Nuova, the love poem. I'm just going to read a few sections of this, and then I'll go to something else. Wait, I have glasses. This is exciting. I hardly ever give readings with glasses. Okay. 28. I take the path that leads to the garden of error. I play with names behind the grove of truth. I drink where the child gathers up his dice. I hide in the thicket where the gazelle trembles. The wolf drowns the shepherd's song. A breeze dusts my body. In the black day, the downpour fills the lake that separates the 2 countries. In a Sumerian goblet, I drink a wine preserved in an amphora of clay, buried underground for millennia, the ancient goblet, fossil from paradise, gives off a breath that I scent as deadly. 29. I wandered, lost, one. I laugh, cry, alone, in the road, exulting. In the practice, keeping watch. In the morning, at rest, after movement. I drop the bridle, unearth the roots, drained of blood. I cross uncertainty, eyes open. I wreathe the nightmare. From my spittle, I pull out the thread, which unravels my body. My form disappears, my soul remains, outside of its carcass, in the prison of cause, which abrogates sight. I walk on filth, palpable in my nothingness. So that's just a few from Tombeau of Ibn Arabi. And then the next thing is Jean-Luc is a philosopher who I've translated a few books by him. One book about listening, another book about sleep, which is this one. It's called The Fall of Sleep. And then I just finished a book called Jouissance in French, which is being published as Coming in English. So that's pretty juicy. I'm not going to read from that. I'm going to read from the sleep book. Just a very short section. This is the chapter that's called The Soul That Never Sleeps. Never, however, never does the soul sleep. That absenting of self and self is unknown to it. Absence belongs to the body and to the mind. It is foreign to the soul. In sleep, the mind abandons itself to the body and disperses its location through it, dissolves its concentration into that soft, almost disjointed expanse. The body, for its part, abandons itself paradoxically to the very location of the mind. It is no longer actually exposed in space, but implicitly or virtually withdrawn into a non-place where it anesthetizes itself and separates itself from the world. The person who sleeps is a mental body or a bodily mind, one lost in the other, and in both cases, in both aspects, a subject extravasated, aspirated, exposed, or existing in the strongest and most problematic senses of these words. In this, the sleeper is always twofold. He, she is himself, herself, and another. Their very sex is undecided, then, more deeply than it is ever so in other conditions, for sleep seduces itself and takes pleasure in itself, which is not in itself. But the soul animates sleep, as well as waking. The soul is both sleeping and vigilant, and for that very reason it does not sleep. Nor is it awakened. In waking, it is that which ceaselessly dozes. In sleeping, it is that which wakes and watches. From all quarters, every time, it is that which, giving form and tonality to a presence, adheres to the edges, to the outlines. Not indeed like a skipper in his ship, but spread throughout the entire expanse of the body, and mingled with it, so that simultaneously at every point, it is like a signal, like a lantern, like a lookout on top of a tall mast, or like a sated seagull on the taffrail. It is like a St. Elmo's fire, or like a brilliant moonbeam on copper, or like a message thrown into the sea, or else like a radio antenna capturing a call for help from another boat, set adrift by its failing engines, or like the glint of the sun on the lenses of the binoculars, in which the image appears of a shabby old tub loaded with boat people who are dying, falling from misery and fear, fallen into a sleep that no longer sleeps, into a dreary lethargy of woe. Okay, so that's the Nasi. And then I'm going to finish just with a passage, just this one. A passage from a book called Zone. By Mathias Enard. It's a 517-page sentence. So it's going to be kind of hard to read because there's no periods, obviously. I'm going to try to read slowly. So let me just tell you a little bit about this book. The narrator is a secret agent. He's half Croatian, half French. And he's carrying a suitcase full of secret documents to the Vatican from Milan to Rome. So there's the same amount of pages in the book as there are kilometers from Milan to Rome. And he's reading another book on the train, which is also reproduced in this book. So that book has periods. But I'm not going to be reading from that book. I'll be reading from the Stream of Consciousness narrative. And what else? So the people in this excerpt, I should just tell you a little bit when he mentioned some of these names. Rolf von Eppen is an Austrian nobleman who he's dealing with. He's getting secret documents from him. Most of the documents have to do with war crimes. And basically the book is sort of a history of all of the wars that have ever happened, like in the history of the world, starting with Troy and the Iliad. So actually this also has the same number of chapters as the Iliad. There's some other things too. All right, so this doesn't have to be this complicated, but it would help actually to know that the person he mentions is Rolf von Eppen, who is this Austrian nobleman that he's dealing with. And Rolf's mother was a noblewoman who had a villa in Trieste, who hosted dinners for the Nazis during the war. So he refers to one of these dinners in this. And also Globocnik, that he mentions, is a high-ranking SS officer. He's also referred to as Globus. And also one other thing, he visits Sobibor, which is an extermination camp, at one point. Okay. I imagine Rolf's noble mother drunk, her eyes glittering, her dress riding up a little, revealing her black stockings felt up from afar by the lustful gaze of the fat Globus. I imagine the fear of defeat and punishment in the Nazis' eyes. The 1,000-year Reich was indeed going to provide beautiful ruins, but much sooner than Speer had foreseen. We left the elegant cafe for a little stroll. Rolf von Eppen was in a nostalgic mood. He took me to the wooded neighborhood above the station where Globocnik had his villa, requisitioned from a certain Angelo Ara, at number 34 on the Via Romagna, a beautiful Art Deco residence, the Globus the Ingenuous, connected by underground passageways to the courthouse buildings where he had his offices. It reminded me of his house in Lublin in Poland, just as strategically situated, next to the SS quarters, the occupation administration, and the HQ of Axion Reinhardt, a villa with 2 floors and a garden, just like the one in Trieste. Lublin the Red was prettily paved, a commercial artery led to the monumental gate, to the old city cut in half by the Nazis to install the ghetto there. The dark little streets were not reassuring at night. A little lower down was the castle, a big, rather austere barracks. I was there in winter, an icy, snowy winter that had no reason to envy the winter of 1943 where temperature is concerned. In the center of Lublin, not many things had changed. I was staying at the Grand Hotel, transformed during the war into a Deutsches Haus with an officer's mess. Stangl had slept there with his wife when she had come from Austria to visit him. It had become a giant hotel with communist rooms, gray wall-to-wall carpeting, and formica cabinets. There were 2 splendid bars. One looked out onto the square with a piano and high ceilings. The other was cozier and more intimate, the former library of the Deutsches Haus. In the morning I had taken Stangl's road to Sobibor, near the Ukrainian border, miles and miles of magnificent forests, under snow, flat forests, without a hill in sight, so smooth you could have slid to Moscow without realizing it. Not a mountain this side of the Urals. Birch trees to the heart's content. Birch trees and a few firs. There were not many cars, mostly pedestrians who walked by the side of the road to get to the nearest bus stop at the outskirts of villages, and then nothing else. The forest. I had passed the railroad, which told me I was headed in the right direction. The heat turned up high in the car, the silence and the noise of the engine. The noise of the engine of the Russian tank that Stangl and Bauer had brought from Lvov. Let's see. The noise of the engine of the Russian tank that Stangl and Bauer had brought from Lvov. The malfunctioning diesel engine propelled black gases into the little brick room at the end of the open-air corridor, bordered with thick hedges made of branches stuck in the barbed wire, The naked Jews ran with their feet in the snow in the winter. It wasn't necessary to whip them much. The cold whipped them well enough. The cold and the snow are effective. The shouts, the door, the silence, and the sound of the engine. In the interminable straight line, I suddenly see a young woman in a black coat standing by the road, alone at the edge of the trees. I must have been dreaming. No, she is really there in the rearview mirror. What is she doing, motionless by the side of the road in her coat, a little black shoulder bag, 1,000 miles away from any inhabited land? I hesitate to make a U-turn. She must be waiting for the bus, next to the trees collapsing beneath the snow. There is nothing here. No village, no farm, no house. Just a woman in the middle of the cold, the snow, and the dead Jews. Is she waiting for me? A reincarnation, a ghost, strange omen. I don't do anything. Silence and fear. Like many others, I do nothing. I don't turn my car around. A sign indicates the train station of Sobibor on the right. A snowy path in a dense wood. My wheels spin at times. There are blankets of fog. I am approaching the terminus, then, the narrow gauge line. Stongol's house where he drank vodka with comrades whom he detested. The train station. The important little camp where, thanks to German meticulousness, hundreds of thousands of bodies were processed. Tons of flesh among the birch trees. There it is. The terminus is approaching. The end of the line. There is nothing. A green cabin, the museum closed in winter. I park the car against a heap of snow. Behind me, railroad workers are sending off a train loaded with logs. Nothing changes. They're laughing because I got covered in snow, next to a memorial that no one visits. Before they laughed because strangers came to die in these lands made for hunting deer, for wood, for snow, but not for running naked towards a tank engine started by a red-faced German. The Poles have a good laugh when faced with disaster. They're used to it. They've been working here for generations. I've come to see, so I get out of the car, but I know that the trees aren't going to speak. I sink into the whiteness up to my ankles. I go forward into the forest. A wide lane leads to a clearing where there is a great dome of silence, the eastern terminus. Here end the railways that lead from Salonika, Westerbork, Ternopil, to Riesenstadt, Paris, from so many cities and villages. The only traces are those left by the does and birds in the snow. There is nothing but the unimaginable and the tallness of the trunks. The wind blows gently. The sky is opaque. I wander around for a while in the clearing without trying to determine exactly where the buildings were, the ditches, the bodies. My brain is white as linen, white as virgin skin. I push the car, manage to make a U-turn and start off again for Lublin. The young woman wasn't waiting in the middle of the deserted forest, back at the Grand Hotel and stone cold, frozen stiff. I sat down in a club chair in the immense bar, wondering what Stangl the gardener drank when he was here with his wife. The night was pitch black. Outside, vehicles were skidding on the melted snow turned muddy. I was very far away, very far. I ordered a tea in an immense and glacial solitude. A blind man came in, accompanied by an old lady. She sat him down at the piano, a black, ancient-looking baby grand. He said a few words and started up a ballad by Chopin. The instrument was out of tune and sounded off-key. I quietly finished my tea, determined to brave the cold and the snow, to buy myself a bottle of vodka in the closest supermarket and confront the long Polish night. The blind man attacked my way in a particularly mawkish tempo. A sign said, "For the blind and crippled," next to a wicker basket. I left him all my change. In Trieste, there's no pianist in the luxurious restaurant where Rolf the banker took me. He's talking to me about Globotchnik, the snake. I don't dare ask him if Himmler's man was his mother's lover. Probably not. Globus the boar must not have been tempting to Austrian nobility, or vice versa. Rolf Capriani von Eppen, the nostalgic, has been keeping us informed about the covert accounts of his clients for years. Companies, various mafias, facades for suspicious activities, out of philanthropy or almost. And I suspect him of acting in the same way with a number of European agencies, which explains why his business is prospering and out of the law's reach. Rolf, the son of the Duchess, who was slumming it with champagne with the heads of the Adriatisches Christenland early in 1945. Who had the idea first, back then? Kalterweg, Rosner, or Globotchnik with swine? We'll never know. Madame la Duchesse, maybe. Maybe the mother of Rolf the cynic asked the same question as Stéphanie, the great question with no answer, as the soldiers in black uniforms told them about their feats of arms. What is it like to kill a man? Globus hooted outright with laughter. He answered, "You're about to see, madame, after you." And all the guests, blind drunk, thought it was an excellent idea. A demonstration. The women hitched up the bras on their breasts, rearranged their creased dresses to head for the cellar, where the 10 Slovenians were piled up behind respectable iron bars. The prisoners saw the charming company coming toward them without understanding, pausing at the bottom of the steps, a meter away from the grill. They got up. Rosener took out his P-38, Kalterweg too. The panic-stricken resistance huddled against the walls like insects. Rosener said, "Who wants to begin?" And a very drunk lady answered, Me. Rosener took her by the waist, put the weapon in her hand, feeling her up a little, but they went over to the bars. Rosener guided her arm. She saw a shadow in the right corner. She pulled the trigger. The shot resounded under the beautiful vault. The wounded Slovenian shouted and collapsed. The audience cried, "Bravo, bravo, encore." And the 4 pieces that belonged to the SS present were emptied into the poor guys, like the bottles of champagne before. Everyone wanted to try their hand at death. The explosions vibrated in the powder-heavy air. The blood spattered the whitewashed walls. The women quivered with fear and pleasure, sobered up fast by the adrenaline. The dying men twisted onto the corpses of their companions. The guests' ears whistled in the great silence that always follows massacres. Everyone went back upstairs without saying a word. Globus, the rational, gave orders for the bodies to be collected and burned at La Riziera, which they should never have left. The women were pale, Homesteader too. Globusnik himself felt a little melancholy. He shouted, "Cognac, cognac," and the trembling major domo immediately brought him a bottle of grappa. Rolf's mother asked to be excused. She wasn't feeling very well. She went back to her apartments to take refuge in her son's room, next to the heavy sleep and tender perfume of unattainable childhood. The young Appan had, of course, no memory of this. He was sleeping piously in his bed, but his mother's diary is very clear, he says. That's what happened, even though the Duchess certainly minimizes her own role, unable to confess, even alone in the intimacy of her journal, what might really have happened that night. As an epitaph, she notes that she walled up the part of the cellar where the events, as she calls them, took place, so as never to see the place again. Rolf recently added a brass plaque to it engraved, "Here died 10 Slovenian heroes killed by the Nazis," a commemorative plaque in his own house, a memorial that he alone can see when he goes downstairs to look for a good bottle for his guests. When we leave the restaurant, the day is beginning to come to a close. The sea has a very soft, very smooth grey tones. Rolf is in a nostalgic mood. He would readily order a cognac or a grappa like Globus, but he is in a hurry to come to an end. The documents are in the trunk of my car, he says. We walk over to the parking lot. Rolf strides a little hunched over. I feel as if he's hesitating about whether to tell me something. He pulls up the neck of his tweed jacket to protect himself from the breeze. His noble Daimler is bottle green, with a Liechtenstein license plate. Even the trunk gives off a scent of leather and luxury. Rolf grabs an elegant bag. He hands it to me, saying, "It has no value, you know." I nod. It has no more value than a corpse or a name on a grave. Poor Rolf the noble, from whom the Nazis took away his title, from whom history took away his title. He is getting revenge by giving me these documents, the reports from Globocnik to Himmler between 1942 and 1945, all the activities of the Action Reinhardt in Poland and Italy. He is getting rid of a weight, Rolf. He looks relieved at contributing to the filling of the suitcase. He shakes my hand. I thank him for lunch. He sketches a smile and gets into his car. Rolf doesn't know that I know his dilemma. I know that vengeful fate wanted him to be born Duke of Auschwitz. Duke of Auschwitz and Zator. Rolf von Auschwitz and Zator. An ancient princely title going back to the 11th century. That is his name. The name of his ancestors which the Nazis tarnished, forcing his coat of arms to remain in shadow forever. Rolf, whose fief is today linked to the largest death factory ever built, bears the weight of history more than others. I wonder if one should laugh or cry at his heraldic scruples and his mother with the troubled friendships. The sun has set. I walk slowly up the seafront. 2 million dead aren't so heavy, in fact. Words and numbers on paper. Men are great technicians at taking notes. I think I'll stop there.